Hey everyone, I'm Michelle Ye Healy, President of the Asian American Journalists Association. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion on covering the 2020 primaries. On behalf of AAJA, I would like to thank CNN for sponsoring today's session and for being such a longtime supporter of AAJA and our mission and our programs. We're really grateful for your partnership. Thank you so much to our fantastic speakers, the women I admire a lot and whose work I follow very closely. The theme of our gathering this year is visibility for both our journalists and our AAPI community. And it's through the important work of reporters like Kyung, MJ, and Natasha that we can achieve greater visibility as an electorate and as journalists. I hope that our attendees will learn a lot from this discussion, and I hope everyone is just as excited as I am. And now I would like to introduce the moderator for today's session, CNN national correspondent Natasha Chen.
Hi, everybody. This is so fun and unique and new and interesting to be here this way. I'm really excited for this. I watched On the Trail on HBO Max, and if you haven't done so yet, please check it out. It's really a wild ride. And to start off with, to kind of give some context of what we're going to talk about, let's show the trailer and then bring in our guests.
It can get a little hairy. See, here they come.
There is nothing like the rush of covering a presidential campaign.
We are CNN's eyes and ears on the ground.
We need to stand by to be ready to go.
For the embeds, you're on a campaign bus, you're at a rally, your life is not your own. We are in the thick of it right now. We get a front row seat to history. I can't imagine a closer front row seat than this.
Everybody has a correspondent, even Donald Trump.
Trump's the only president I've ever covered. When the president goes after the press,
the fake news, these guys,
the crowd join in. It's definitely hostile. You still have to do your job. I have no emotion, so it's perfect. I'm like half kidding.
People always ask, oh my God, you have kids. How do you do it? It's tough to be away from your kids, but in order to tell the story, you have to go to the story.
Kyung and I work very well together. I don't think I would be as successful in my job without her.
Jasmine knows the story, and she's going to speak mine.
People can think what they want about me because I'm still going to get the job done. And better than most of y'all.
Sometimes I wake up and I forget where I am.
The coronavirus pandemic is changing everything.
I am your president of law and order.
We thought 2016 was crazy.
It's stressful. I think I don't really breathe until the day is over.
You also just feel like you have to say something because if you're not going to say it, then who is?
What we have is an economic crisis, public health crisis, social crisis.
This moment is unlike any other.
The question of what kind of leader do I want has never been more real than right now.
Oh my gosh, goosebumps. I love that trailer. This is an amazing film. And now I want to bring in two of my amazing colleagues who are featured in this. Correspondent MJ Lee and Senior National Correspondent Kyung La. Kyung, did I get your title right? Are you senior and important?
Reporter. We're always reporters.
Reporters. And Kyung, you're coming to us from LA today, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, LA. I'm in LA.
MJ, where are you?
Spare bedroom.
I'm in New York City in my living room.
Great. And I'm in my Atlanta apartment. So we are spanning the country today, just like all of you who are joining us. And you know, what struck me in watching this film was, you know, I'm aware of what all my colleagues do on the campaign trail, but just watching those behind the scenes moments, especially in 2020, just hit me, right? We are seeing you all on the campaign trail. We're following January and February and early March. And as a viewer, we know what's about to happen, right? This is like, this shouldn't be a Hollywood movie, but it is at this point. We know what's about to happen. We know the other shoe's going to drop. So I want to just start with asking the both of you what it feels like to sit here today at your computers discussing this film instead of being at the Mayflower Hotel in DC months away from Election Day, having been on the trail physically and then suddenly at home?
Well, it's frustrating, right? I mean, you want to be on the trail, you want to be covering politics. At this stage, I mean, I didn't know if I was going to be following a candidate, but I thought we'd be talking to voters. We'd be talking to a really diverse electorate. You know, we have so many women of color running for Congress right now, the most ever in history. And I'm in my spare bedroom filled with regret that I painted this room yellow. I mean, you know, I think MJ is trying to cover Biden from her house, and that's incredibly difficult, isn't it, MJ?
The last couple of months have been completely surreal. I know that everybody else feels that way too. Well, first of all, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you, AJ, for having us. It's great to be sandwiched between two other powerhouse AAPI reporters at CNN. When HBO Max sent me the screener to the documentary a couple of weeks ago, there was this scene of me just like doing my job at a campaign event. And when it came on screen, I was watching it with my husband. I got a little emotional just watching myself do the work. And it was totally unexpected. And I like turned to my husband and I said, that was such a hard time for me. I just feel so overwhelmed watching myself. And it really was just like such a reminder, an unexpected reminder of how difficult and nonstop and 24/7 covering the campaign was and is supposed to be. You are running on no sleep. You forget what city you're in. You know, there are weeks when you are, traveling to multiple cities and states in such a short span of time. And I think the contrast to now, which is that I haven't been on a plane in probably 3-4 months. Super Tuesday was the last time that I flew on a commercial airplane. And it just feels like, I don't know, if I could have told myself then that this is the experience that we would be having, I think I would have been totally floored.
Yeah,
Oh
I
my
mean, for a
gosh.
little context on what the travel is like, and MJ sort of touched on it. It's you would wake up, at least for me, I would wake up at 3 a.m. local time in Los Angeles, be on a flight, land somewhere, get to South Carolina, and be on television by 6 p.m. Eastern time that night. So then you would drive to your next location. So that's a little bit of what travel and the campaign trail is like. And so that's why MJ says what she does, where it's just like running straight into a brick wall and your life completely changing.
It is insane. Oh, who's got a puppy?
Who is a dog?
Sorry. My dog is barking at a sound in the hallway. I apologize.
Oh my gosh, I love
Anyways.
it. So to kind of bring in folks who maybe are just joining us, we're here with MJ Lee and Kyung La, who were on the campaign trail physically nonstop, like they were just describing, on planes, not sleeping, and then the pandemic comes, right? And so everybody is trying to cover things remotely. For myself, as a general assignment correspondent, it's a little bit different. There was less hectic travel by plane, but I have been on planes now for the past few months within the Southeast region. But I also want to point out that Jasmine, who was in embed, it was supposed to be with us today. And just like breaking news and the news cycle happens, she had to do actual work and couldn't be with us the last minute. So hopefully, Kyung, you can speak to Jasmine's role and how you guys work together, which was featured so well in the film. And I want to remind everyone who's joining us, you can use the Pathable page where you came in to use the chat function. I see a lot of you talking already in the chat. Please drop your questions in there, and this awesome CNN folks behind the scenes will flag those good questions to me so that we can get those in later on in our session. So as things come up, as you watch more clips that we're going to show you, please do put your questions in the Pathable chat, And I'm going to do my best job multitasking. If I look over here, it's because I'm looking to see what you guys are all talking about. But, speaking of Jasmine, who couldn't be with us last minute, maybe we can start a little bit with that and explaining, Kyung, if you will, what was the job that she had? How did she work with you? Because I think a lot of people hear the word embed and don't exactly know what that entails.
About how, did you lose me? Hello. Oh, I'm back.
We got you.
Okay. So you heard Jasmine talk about how, now I can't remember exactly what the quote is, but you basically see her sort of working behind the scenes. What an embed is you're embedded with your candidate. So everything that the candidate says and does in the public space, everywhere they go, what hotel they go to, what flights they're on, that's something that is the embed's job. So any sort of public comment that may signify a policy switch or a position switch or a definite policy of that candidate, that's something that the embed will be across and will send that to the political team. It's something that I think when I was in local news, I wasn't even aware of what an embed was. That they are doing so much of the expert work that the reporter simply cannot do with a photographer and doing live shots. They are the ones who I can turn to and say, okay, what did the candidate do today? What video do we have? Where did they go? Who did they talk to? And so that's something, especially if you're a young journalist watching this, if you have the gut and the stamina to be an embed, it is something that is indescribable. I think every single embed here will tell you it's exhausting and it's difficult and it will move you in ways that you never thought as a person, but it can change you so much as far as the trajectory of your career and help you grow in this business. So that's something that I have never worked with in my career, as an embed, and I worked with them very, very closely this year, just as MJ did with Daniela, and you saw Daniela in there with MJ.
Yeah, actually, if we can maybe ask MJ about your experience working with Daniela, and MJ, I think you covered both Warren and Bloomberg at a certain point. Maybe talk about covering both of those campaigns, switching from one to the other, and then your experience with your embed.
Yeah, so I started out by covering Elizabeth Warren starting on day one of her campaign. So this is going back to December of 2018 because she announced on New Year's Day, or New Year's Eve rather. And then when things got a little more heated during the primaries and Michael Bloomberg decided to make this late entry into the 2020 campaign, CNN realized we needed to have more resources covering him. And so they asked me to do double duty and cover both Elizabeth Warren and Michael Bloomberg. It's not an experience I anticipated having. I never thought that I would be assigned to two candidates at once. The Bloomberg campaign, as it turns out, it didn't end up being a long campaign. So that was a pretty short assignment, but juggling both was definitely a challenge and it was a lot, but the experience of getting to sort of compare one campaign with the other was actually a really interesting one. And Daniela was my embed counterpart on the Elizabeth Warren campaign. And I will just say, just to echo what Kyung was saying about the role of embeds, I mean, if I thought that I was, too obsessively covering Elizabeth Warren and, tracking her every move and being her stalker and completely exhausted because I was doing this, so full time and traveling all the time. Like that was Daniela's experience times 100. So I don't know. They are total heroes and total rock stars. And I agree with Kyung completely. It is a once in a lifetime, I think, reporting experience. And for anybody who is interested remotely in being a political reporter, I think being an embed is probably one of the most unique and interesting experiences you can have.
Yeah, I see someone on the chat with a very they said rookie question, how do you spell embed? It is embed as an embedded journalist. So EMBED, that is exactly what you thought. And it is a position that we're talking about. So these are specific people who are embedded with each campaign. And that's actually a great transition, since MJ talked about Daniela, to show our first clip that we can give you a sense of what it was like as an embed on the Warren campaign. And I think this clip we're about to show you is the day that Warren dropped out of the campaign. Here it is.
That it really was a moment of thinking about how my mother and dad, if they were still here, would feel about this. For that moment standing in the booth, I miss my mom and my dad.
Senator. Thanks, Senator. Senator.
It was kind of like a little more intense than I thought it was going to be. I recognize the work she put in.
You know, this press conference that she just finished up outside of her house sort of had the feel of almost a send-off, right? She and her husband and her dog. We did see a very candid and frank and open and reflective Senator Warren here.
Hey, I love you. This is it. I'm seeing all the other embeds cry too, and it's like making me emotional. Come here. I know, I didn't think I'd feel this way. That was super emotional. I know. I didn't expect it to be. It was really emotional. I thought it would just be like, bye.
I think Daniela is fast, is hungry. She definitely has that drive. But I think those skills aside, she's a hugely empathetic person. I would have been surprised if she hadn't been so emotional today with the end of this assignment.
Oh God, this case, guys.
Thanks for everything. I was sitting on the end. Thank you for everything, Jay.
You good?
Mm-hmm. Just feels weird.
Like her entire life has been this one candidate, right? You know, that part of your life is over and there's like a finality to it.
It's weird, I thought I wouldn't care.
What?
I thought I wasn't gonna care. You killed it.
Wow. I think my initial response the first time I saw that is similar to what a lot of you are saying in the Pathable chat right now, getting teary-eyed. Why are we getting emotional? MJ, you were there in that moment. Talk to me about what that felt like. Have you been in that position before where you're caught by surprise by how much the finality of the campaign affected you emotionally?
No, it's definitely emotional. I think, you know, you spend so much of your life and so many months getting to know this candidate, getting to know her staffers, and really like your entire life revolving around covering this campaign. And as I was saying before, the experience that I was having, you know, Daniela was having times 100. So I knew that sort of the intensity of emotions I was feeling that day, she was feeling even more. And I think just watching that clip, I sort of distinctly remember feeling kind of protective of her. I knew that it was going to be a tough day in a lot of ways, just because, you know, a big part of your life has sort of come to an end, right? I know that she developed, you know, very close friendships with the other TV network embeds who also covered Elizabeth Warren. I know that she was having a lot of questions about, well, what am I going to do next? Who am I going to be working with next? Am I going to be okay? And of course, you know, the answer is yes. I just instinctively felt protective of her and didn't want her to feel like, you know, worried about what might be next. And also just wanted her to be able to like take the time to fully appreciate what an amazing job she had done and what a unique experience she had, you know, really having a front row seat to this incredibly unique campaign that we covered for 14 months. Also, that day happened to be my birthday. So I will always remember, my birthday was a day that Elizabeth Warren, a candidate I had covered for over a year, dropping out. I remember my colleagues that I was working with that day, Lynn Tran and Beth English, they like surprised me with a little cupcake in the car, and we were going, and I saw the cup in my mind, and I definitely, there were tears. Like I felt a little overwhelmed because that's when I sort of let it hit me that like, no, this was a long time in my life that I devoted to covering this person, and like this is it, and it's happening on my birthday, and something about that just felt like a lot.
Oh gosh.
You know what? I mean, one thing that we should point out, just as the embeds, they actually give up their apartments. Most of them move to living in hotels 100% of the time. So I can't remember if Daniela did that, but I know Jasmine gave.
Hey, all right, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging tight. I really appreciate your patience. This is the world we live in. And I know that we have a lot more questions that came in through Pathable Chat. Thank you for chatting with me while we were all getting our coffee refills and going to the bathroom. I think when we left off, we were talking about that emotional clip from Danielle an entire year while doing this. And it's an emotionally draining experience because you're literally stopping your entire life to devote to one project. And I think that people. Oh, is it stalling again? Okay, all right. Folks are chatting about that. So, I want to bring it back to Kyung, and because I think that's a good transition to ask some people, wondering about the emotional toll, because you're also, the film shows clips of you with your children and your husband very briefly. It shows Dana Bash, trying to FaceTime her son. Really, how do you have a whole life and a whole career that, where you're still okay, where you are still okay?
So before I even took the assignment, knowing that it was going to be a year plus commitment. Can you guys see me? Am I moving here? Okay.
are doing on the campaign trails and managing your personal lives and making sure that you have that space to stay sane. But Kyung, one of the things you're talking about of covering the first Black Asian candidate, one of the folks on the chat was asking about how both embeds and yourselves can wrapped up all in that one person, right? Whether you start to love them or start to hate them, it's all about them. So maybe talk about your perspective on the candidate that you cover, how you handle your personal feelings about that candidate, especially given your own.
Well, let's start with this as the playing ground, that being a white male is not the unbiased or objective starting point. That's just not it. The objectivity question, I think, is a difficult one for journalists, whether you are a mother or whatever you experience you bring with it. It doesn't mean that you are biased because you have a lived-in experience. So let's start with that. When you cover a story, the white male perspective does not mean that that is the objective perspective. The way that I come at looking at political reporting is that you are the expert in that candidate. This was my first year doing the presidential campaign, 100%. So I'm the expert in this person. When I started with Kamala Harris and then moved to Amy Klobuchar, I read everything that they had written that I could get my hands on. I memorized their speeches. I knew their likes and dislikes, where they grew up, their biography. I was the expert in that person. So that is what a campaign reporter is. You're the expert. You are as equally critical as you are, looking at what their experiences and their success is. So I would say I did probably more tough stories on both Harris and Klobuchar than I did, easy ones, because there was a lot. You're a politician. There's going to be a lot to criticize, and that's part of what the electorate wants to know. What are their weaknesses? What is it that we want in a candidate to take on an incumbent? That's what the Democratic electorate wanted to know. So I think that whole idea of bias, first of all, when you cover a campaign, you have to look at yourself as an expert. You're not cheering them on, and I did not experience that from where I was with my colleague Jasmine, who was the embed. She was very critical of both as well.
I know that Jasmine actually talked in the film a little bit about her personal background with a family that really introduced her to grassroots politics, and then her identity as a woman of color in 2020, creating that view of what's going on. And Kyung, your point is, I feel like that should be some sort of hashtag at this point, but your point that the white male perspective is not the objective perspective. I think that is so key. And speaking of white men, we have another clip that I'd love to have everyone see, because Mike Bloomberg was for a moment sort of determined as potentially this person who could come through and really be the person to beat Donald Trump. And I know MJ covered him extensively. So let's look at how this film captured those moments when Bloomberg came onto the scene. Take a look.
Mayor Bloomberg thinks he can buy this election. He thought he could waltz on that stage, push everybody else off, and become the Democratic nominee.
You did a good job last night.
Thank you. Well, that's what I'm going to do to Donald Trump.
Yes.
But I need your help.
You got my help.
If she does not do well in Nevada and South Carolina, she will likely be out of the race by Super Tuesday.
So how do you get from here to there?
As of right now, my counterpart on this campaign, MJ Lee, is straddling both Senator Warren and Bloomberg. I think that's a really interesting assignment considering their overlap.
We don't have reporting on the NDA, so we have to stay away from it. Can we please make it a more generic question about the attacks left at Bloomberg last night? She can talk about his rough night.
As of like a week ago, CNN started putting a lot more resources into covering Michael Bloomberg. The big question is there somebody who can consolidate the non-Sanders vote? And if that person isn't Joe Biden, then maybe there's an opening for Michael Bloomberg.
It is my pleasure to introduce to you the next president of the United States, Mike Bloomberg.
MJ, put into context for us what we know about these NDAs.
You know, Brooke, Michael Bloomberg and his campaign obviously knew that he would get questions about these allegations on the debate stage. He didn't seem adequately prepared.
Now, you've all heard the slogan, Mike will get it done. And if you haven't, I've wasted an awful lot of money here.
I think the campaign knows that he does need to do better because next week we have a Democratic debate, and they clearly do not want Michael Bloomberg to have a repeat of last night.
So how was your night last night?
Wow. Okay. So one of the things I just saw in the Pathable chat is something that I have been experiencing when I watch films these days or TV shows. You watch all these people like hugging and like super close to each other, and you're like, oh my God, so close. They're so close to each other. So that's just totally different world we're in now. And MJ, maybe we can ask you a little bit about the experience of covering Bloomberg, because, you know, in this day and age when we have this racial reckoning, right? Not just the pandemic, not just the 2020 campaign, but we are dealing with George Floyd and everything that's fallen out from that. Maybe talk about the experience of how the world was reacting from your standpoint to Bloomberg's candidacy.
I mean, this was such a fascinating moment in the 2020 race. It came at a moment when people really were not clear if Joe Biden had a future in the race. He wasn't doing very well. And all of a sudden, you had Michael Bloomberg enter the race. And the people who were not satisfied with Bernie Sanders, and in fact, they felt like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, for that matter, were completely unacceptable to them. They didn't see strength in Joe Biden. I think these people started wondering, is Michael Bloomberg sort of the answer that we were looking for? And the fascinating thing for me was that I had just spent, a year plus covering Elizabeth Warren, and there could not have been a candidate more different from Elizabeth Warren. They were polar opposites. Obviously, woman versus man. She had spent her entire political career, opposing big money in politics. Here comes literally a billionaire who said, I will spend whatever it takes to try to make myself president. That's sort of like the fundamental, biggest no-no for Elizabeth Warren by her books. The idea of a rich person being able to spend whatever money they can to try to, essentially buy themselves the highest office in the land. For so many reasons, I think the two of them were so primed to clash. And then they did. I think you all remember the big debate night in Vegas, where a lot of people, I think, look back on that night when Elizabeth Warren really went after Michael Bloomberg and the issue of the NDAs and the lawsuits that he had faced from, former female employees. They look back on that night as like the night that Elizabeth Warren killed Michael Bloomberg's campaign. So to be sort of balancing both of those campaigns and both of those storylines was actually really interesting and fun. And I'm really glad that I had that experience. Again, like two campaigns that could not have been more different.
That was such a great moment in the film, because when you're talking about the debate stage and Elizabeth Warren and Mike Bloomberg, the film actually focuses on the embeds watching that from a hotel room at that moment, and they are that moment in. I hope that we are still good here with our signal, but maybe this is a good transition. I think I see a lot of people experiencing anti-Asian sentiment or just discrimination in general. Obviously, Kyung has talked about her experience, what happened to her on the air, and I've talked about mine as well. And mask wearing, which has become political And the person, said, "Get out of my effing country." And it's one of those things where it's a reminder that there are so many people who still see faces who look different from them and think that they don't belong here. There's a sense of otherness. And Kyung and MJ both, maybe you can speak to what you've noticed on the campaign trail, whether it's from people events or even from other people working the campaigns. What sort of nuanced, small Are we back again? I don't know where we left off, but okay. All right. Well, I was going to throw to both MJ and Kyung to ask about your experiences, whether it's from people who attend campaign events or even folks who work the campaigns, whether there were even small nuanced moments that you felt were acts of aggression toward your identity, or maybe even more obvious macro aggressions.
So I nomination. But if you've been to Iowa, especially if you talk to Iowans, I spent a lot of time in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. These are really earnest people who want to be a part of the democratic process. And I would guess that a lot of the people, especially in Iowa, who I met, had probably never spoken to an Asian person face to face. There's a hilarious moment that kind of is emblematic of that. On the same day that Jasmine had an experience where some lady, just very sweetly, but in a very shocking way, touched Jasmine's hair because she had never seen a black woman's hair.
Whoa.
Some guy came up to me and said, "Mrs. Yang, I love your husband's campaign." And I was like, it's a good thing she's so good looking.
Oh my
Or else
God.
we would have some problems, buddy. No, so I mean, but I didn't take it as coming from a terrible place. Did I experience it as somebody like maybe had never seen an Asian person before? Probably, right? But when you're in these very small towns, I do try to look at it from their perspective and their lived-in experiences. Is MJ gone? Did we lose MJ?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Oh, there you
I'm
are.
here.
Okay.
MJ, what about you? What kinds of things have you seen on the road?
I mean, I feel really fortunate that, particularly in this era of COVID, I have not had the experience that Natasha, you have had. I know Kyung, you have had, of sort of being accosted or approached by somebody with a level of hostility simply based on the fact that I look Asian and that I am Asian. So I guess that's fortunate. I also think that's sad that my colleagues have had to experience that. I will say, just as a political reporter, I definitely experienced for the first time back in 2016, because I initially covered Donald Trump's campaign before moving over to cover Hillary Clinton, very much this feeling of being the other, as Kyung was talking about. I had not spent a ton of time traveling across the US. I was born in Korea, grew up in Hong Kong, and really came to the US for a part of high school and college. A state like Iowa, I was not familiar with it. I had not traveled to really very many places other than, on the West Coast and the East Coast. And that was such a culture shock for me, right? This feeling of like walking into a giant high school gymnasium and being so keenly aware that I am definitely the only Asian person and the only person that looks like this in this crowd of thousands of people.
Or
and
probably
I did
the
have
entire
experiences.
city.
Yeah, exactly. You talk about like raising the diversity factor in an entire town or a city, right? Just by being
Jazz
there.
are like, hey, it's like triple now.
Yeah, exactly. I did have in 2016, sorry, the experience of, getting comments from white voters that definitely made clear, even if it wasn't hostile, like they are seeing me as somebody who is not from this country, who is not American, questions being asked about me about, Donald Trump's immigration stance, or, a man saying to me, no offense to you, but, and then making a comment about people who are not from this country. And I kind of feel like that's like a very widely shared AAPI experience. I assume for a lot of us, just this feeling of, are we the other? Are we being perceived as the other? And really just wanting to, fit in. I feel like that's like the quintessential immigrant experience.
That's why I stopped answering those questions of, where are you from? I'm from Chicago, but where are your parents from?
Right.
You mean Streamwood, outside of
No,
Chicago.
but where are you really from?
Where are you really from? Right. My mom lives in Orange
And,
County now. So I just get tired of that question.
Absolutely, and who wouldn't, right? I mean, I still get some social media posts and private messages to my CNN accounts asking me what kind of dog I like to eat and what kind of bats I like to eat, and I think there's a problem here where people feel like they are that what we are experiencing in this pandemic is being traced back to some sort of stereotyped wide behavior in Asia. And that's, I don't know what we can do about it except continuing to talk about it, right? Even after the encounter I had on the beach with the person saying, get out of my country, and I talked about it publicly, someone who was very well-meaning wrote to me and said, you're always welcome in our country. And I think, it's like, I don't miss the point, dude, because the point is that it is also my country. It's not just yours. Like, I thank you for making me feel welcome, but this is my country. I was born here. So I think that that's probably something we all deal with on some level all the time. I do want to encourage that people continuing to use the Pathable chat to put your questions in. I do want to move to some of those questions soon. Since we did spend some time with technical problems, I apologize for that. But one of the questions is for Kyung. This is about the special that you did 2 years ago about voter suppression. And this person wants to ask, is it a big part of this year's conversation with voters? How much do you think that should be covered given the pandemic and the latest changes at USPS?
Well, I think that absolutely. When we were talking about it 2 years ago, reflecting back on what had happened in 2016, especially in the state of Wisconsin, if you look ahead to what is happening in this upcoming election, 100% that those issues that were beginning in 2016 and were carried forward, yes, 100%. They are now in the forefront. I think that's why you're seeing, at least at CNN, we have an entire beat dedicated to covering voting issues. The part of our political unit has now been carved out to look at what happens when people go to the polls. What is mail-in voting going to look like? What is the truth about what is happening with the mail? And the Postal Service in general. So all of these issues that we had discussed a couple of years ago in that doc, it was an hour-long doc. 2 years ago feels like an eternity. Is now a full-time beat because those issues are that big of a deal moving forward. And a reminder. The one way as Americans we all have a place in democracy is by that single vote. And so if you don't have access to that vote and if your vote is not counted, then what is American democracy? And so fundamentally that is why it is so important this upcoming election and why CNN is dedicated to covering it.
Who knew that the mail would be so controversial, right? I mean, it's just this era where everything has become politicized. And speaking of things that become politicized, I think a lot of folks wonder how the two of you, and to some extent, to a lesser extent, what I do, how we encounter people who say that we are fake news or who disagree or criticize how we are covering something. I think, the curiosity is in real time. if you are face to face with a person like that, how do you two personally handle that situation? And then more generally speaking, how do you power on?
I feel like just in general, the only way to handle that is to keep doing our jobs and let our work, speak for itself. And when it's a face-to-face interaction, and I've had them, particularly, looking back on those Trump rallies, you basically can't engage because you don't know where that person is coming from and what that interaction can lead to. Especially when you might be traveling alone or with a small team. I think it's just to be polite, maybe hear them out. And unfortunately, sometimes the safest thing to do is to not engage if the person looks like they are getting heated. But again, otherwise, I think just first rule of thumb is to continue doing our best work and show with our work that news is not fake news. I think that's the best
I
thing we
felt a
can
shift.
do.
I don't know, MJ, if you feel the same. I felt a bit of a shift from 2018 to 2020. In 2018, I felt it was much more helpful for me at a Trump rally to go and actually engage with people, to talk to people in the crowd. Because as soon as I started having a conversation with someone, they would engage and we would try to talk as regular people, maybe even just see me as a normal person and talk on that level. So this year, most recently during the closures of businesses and states closing down, I've done a couple, several of these open Arizona, open California rallies, and they have been much more hostile, much more in your face, much more where they will not talk to you as a person, where you can't find some sort of connection, and that is really sad to me. I think one of our strengths as mainstream media reporters is to be able to talk to all people, and I found it more difficult to try to get through. A lot of, but then the last example that I'm thinking of, there were a number of people at the Open Arizona rally that I was at with cameras, very aggressive, to where I felt like I couldn't even say anything. And I just, would ignore them and try to do my job. They would interfere at every single step I took. So you do what you can. You try to do your job. But I have found it difficult in certain settings to get my job finished.
Yeah, and someone in the chat, Nandita, is asking, kind of to your experience in 2018, Kyung, but probably less so now. Have you ever been able to turn a racist comment or an aggression at an event like that into something that changed that person's mind in the moment? Have you encountered people who are open to that conversation?
I don't know if they're really open to the conversation, but I found a very unusual thing, especially in 2018. As soon as you start to talk to people and tell them who you are and, why you're there, I ask what news sources they listen to. We just have a kind conversation. They almost always want a selfie at the end of the conversation. Almost always. I mean, I'm sure, MJ, you've experienced that too. It's extraordinarily strange. So I don't think I've changed their mind. Perhaps they've come to see me as more of a human being, to where at least they have a memento from it, right?
I've
The
heard Jim
selfie thing
Acosta say.
reminds me. Sorry, the selfie thing just reminded me of how, when you get a hostile email in your work inbox and they're just yelling at you and saying you're fake news and, they hate the work that you're doing and, it's just incredibly hostile. And when you take the time to write back and engage them and say, I'm sorry you feel that way, this is how I feel about the integrity of my work, blah, 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 have a nice day, best MJ Lee. The number of times where the person has written back and said, basically said, I didn't think that there was a person on the other side of this email. And I think kind of feeling, I don't know, maybe embarrassed or just realizing no, you're not sending this email out into a black hole. Somebody is going to see it and the person seeing it is a real person doing their jobs. And I would never send an email like that to somebody else just trying to do their best at their day jobs, right? So I don't know. Sometimes I just think like people aren't quite aware that, you know, even if we are like people on TV and used to being, you know, more public facing, yeah, we're real people with real feelings, and we hear what they're saying. And I think sometimes engaging them reminds them of all of those things.
Except in social media. I don't have any success engaging people on social media. That doesn't
Yeah,
usually work out for
that's
me.
never successful.
Yeah.
It's so hard. People can just remain anonymous with whatever they say and do. So they don't have to actually have that face-to-face interaction, which today is probably even more exacerbated because everyone is remote, right? So we're all at our computers. We can all say crazy things online. So I don't know if that will get worse. But I want to go back to some questions that people earlier in the session had asked and are patiently waiting for you all to answer. One of the questions is, how do Asian correspondents add nuance to their reporting at the front line of election coverage? Either of you have thoughts about that?
Okay, you're gonna be mad at me. I'm sorry. I was just looking at a text that I had to read. Say the question one more time.
Young, I think you're also sending like weird text by accident to our chain. I don't know why you're sending us hearts and stuff. I love you too, but anyway.
I was trying to reply. I was trying to reply to Jasmine. Sorry.
Okay, the question is, how do Asian correspondents add nuances to their reporting at the front line of election coverage?
I think, at least for me, it was more of a person of color perspective and female perspective that I brought to the Harris campaign and to the Klobuchar campaign. Both had a lot of issues as a campaign to deal with when it came to addressing people of color issues, namely the prosecutorial records of both Klobuchar and Harris. So I always approached it from that perspective. How did their past as a prosecutor impact their dealings with prosecuting people of color back then, and then how does that impact them today? So that was one sort of bucket that always was an issue and prevalent in both of those campaigns. For the other, at least for me, it's really impossible. It was impossible for me to cover Harris without seeing her racial background. You could not walk into a Kamala Harris campaign event without seeing a ton of, and regard Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, California, wherever, multiracial, multi-ethnic families, a lot of mothers bringing their mixed race children to these rallies. And I am not married to someone who's Asian. I have mixed race children. That is something I immediately identified with. And so I did a story on that. And I just captured little moments along the trail, and we eventually put it together as a story. So I think bringing your viewpoint to the campaign is something that is vitally important, because then you represent the people who are there. You see them. Maybe somebody else who doesn't have your background or your experience doesn't see them. I saw them. And then there were at least a couple of different events in Nevada that dealt with AAPI issues, and I felt Harris really connecting with her immigrant mother's background. And so I did stories on that because it, I am an immigrant. I was born overseas, and, it is something that is a part of my identity, and that I wanted to be a part of the campaign, because that is also a part of the voters who are going to have a say in November.
Well, MJ, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think Kyung answered that perfectly.
Yeah, and we're like I said, we are all sitting here at our computers instead of being in DC originally as planned, because the initial thought is this is just a few months away from November, and what a time to be in the political nerve center, perhaps before Election Day. But as it is, where we're sitting how would you say journalists should cover the next few weeks, months leading up to November? As we get closer, what types of stories would you encourage journalists to go after? Today is runoff day. There's an election in Georgia. So what do you think we should be focusing on?
I mean, as a political story, I think one of the biggest stories, and we are seeing this already, is going to be about some of the statements that are coming from the very top, the president, about voting fraud and mail fraud, and trying to sort of get people to doubt and be suspicious about the legitimacy potentially of the results in November. I feel like there is not going to be a bigger story than that, and anything that political reporters can do to sort of set the record straight and start doing it now. Because yes, the election is a couple of months away still, but early voting is going to start in a matter of weeks, and all of this is just around the corner. And I think it is really our responsibility to make sure that we are doing the best job possible to, explain on air every chance we get why some of those statements that are coming from the president about the integrity of our democratic voting system are simply untrue, and to sort of put to rest doubts that people might be having as a result about the integrity of whatever results we get in November. I just think that there's not going to be a bigger and more important story than that.
I think that something that we covered quite heavily in 2018 that we have not been able to cover well this year because of the campaign. Sorry. Because of this is a presidential year, is if you look in your district, wherever you are as a reporter, look at who is running for Congress in your district. Look who is running for your state office. And you are going to see that the person running for office this year is more female and is more woman of color. There are being records set of Asian Americans, Native Americans, Black women, Hispanic women, all running for office. It is a record this year. So that is a story. While MJ is 100% right, it is our jobs to tell the truth, to be government watchdog, to get the correct information out. We also have to remember that there is this groundswell, this shift in representation that's happening right under our feet.
I want to continue to get through as many questions as we can here. Somebody's asking about our emotional wellness and physical health, how we keep up with that, such demanding schedules. For me, I actually, I'm very good at turning off my job and the news when I am off. I know some reporters are, just fully sucked into the news cycle all the time and can't break away. I have always compartmentalized because journalism is only one of my many passions. I sing and I tap dance, and I am a huge Disney park freak. And so I spend an insane amount of time outside of my work focusing on theater and Disney and things like that. And I just turn the TV off. So that's me. I don't know about you guys.
I think for me, it definitely helps, as Kyung was talking about, with her husband who had worked in news and just totally gets it. My husband is also a political reporter, and I often, wonder what this experience would be like if he didn't totally understand what it is I'm going through and why I'm so busy or why I have to travel so much. So having that support system at home is so important. I also think that just really learning to lean on your colleagues that you become close to and work with so closely. I'm really grateful that 2020 and this assignment has, led me to become, very close friends with Kyung. She's not someone I knew very well, 2 years ago. So that's one of the best things that's happened out of this campaign. I think really just letting it be okay to lean on your friends and your colleagues, especially when you're traveling. I mentioned my colleague Lynn Tran earlier, somebody I traveled a ton with during the primaries. We would always make a point of driving like however many minutes we had to out of the way to like at the end of the day find a great Asian restaurant, or even if it's not great because you're in a city where there aren't many options, but just for us, like that comfort food was so important, so we would always make a point of finding some decent to hopefully good Asian food to have at the end of the day. Like little things like that I think have helped
Was that
me
New Hampshire that
stay
we ate at
sane
that
when
place
traveling.
with Carolyn? That was New
I
Hampshire,
know that
right?
that was not great. I forced them to go to this I think it was like a Chinese slash
so bad.
Vietnamese. I know, I felt
when
terrible.
you know which it is, that's not great, right? When they have like
Hey, desperate times call for desperate measures.
Yeah, exactly. I want to ask another question, and I'm actually going to combine this one with something that just came into the chat. The initial question is, how do you handle all the inputs of reporting, keeping track of competing reporters' tweets, campaign releases, your own on-the-street news gathering, to name a few? How do you handle and prioritize that? And I want to combine with someone else who just asked, how do you cover the president's claims and fact check without sounding biased? Because I think that's all about what we gather, right? All of the input that we're gathering. How do we prioritize it, fact check it, and keep it all straight?
Let's start with fact checking, because it's very simple to fact check when someone isn't telling the truth. The truth is not bias. If yesterday in the president's news conference, he spoke about how children don't transmit coronavirus, that's not true, right? So it's very easy to fact check when you have an avalanche of medical research and experts telling you what science says versus what he may be saying or is being led to believe. So the truth is not biased. Facts are facts, and that's something that you need to stand on. As right, I mean, MJ, wouldn't you say that it's pretty clear on something like that? And trying to fact check the president.
Yes, I think it's pretty straightforward. To Kyung's point, if the person is not telling the truth, that it's demonstrably false, then you state what is the truth, and it's a pretty straightforward thing to do. To your first question about how to keep track of all the moving pieces and all the news that's coming in, I mean, in my office at work, which is a place I have not been to in many weeks, I had multiple screens, and one of the most important ones is the moving tweet deck screen, where you can create lists to make sure you're following the right kinds of reporters who also cover what you are. I hate the amount of time that I spend looking at Twitter, but it's kind of a necessity, I think, particularly if you're covering politics. Natasha, you were saying earlier that you're really good at compartmentalizing your work and your personal life. I am not so good at that, and I think that also comes with covering just being a political reporter. And when you have a beat that doesn't end when you leave the office, just makes it really difficult to do. So unfortunately, it's a lot of being glued to my phone and glued to my computer at all hours of the day. It's not healthy, I will say that.
Yeah, it's rough. And I definitely I hear that. I am lucky that in general assignment reporting, that still happens. This stuff happens on your days off, of course, and then you're asked to stay when you're supposed to be off, which is why I no longer do musical theater. Oh, well. But one of the things I think in checking everybody else's questions, I want to get to this one. What are some of the practices in socially distant political coverage that you think will become the standard? Or do you think we'll be back to business as usual once the pandemic is over? I mean, you're already both experiencing some of the ways that you cover the campaigns in that pivotal switch between in person to now being in your home. So what's going to stick with us from that?
I don't know. I mean, I try to imagine what the world is going to look like after a vaccine, and I struggle to understand what it's going to look like. I think we have to know what kind of efficacy the vaccine is going to have, what is the risk that's going to be the case still for, an older politician. I struggle with fully picturing if my kids are going to go back to school. I can't even imagine that. So I think it's really, we just have to take it as it comes. I don't know what it's going to look like.
Yeah, and that's fair. I know that some people have to go soon, but I want to maybe ask this one last question, because this is very important. After 2016, there was some criticism about major news organizations who had, quote, got it wrong, not covering enough of the heartland and getting the beat of what people were truly thinking and feeling. Do you think that large news organizations are capturing that this time in the 2020 coverage in the heartland?
Right now?
I think the answer is yes for CNN. I mean, maybe pre-pandemic a little bit more when we were freer to travel. Yeah, I think that 2016 was a big learning lesson for many of us and for, specific outlets who realized looking back, like, yeah, we didn't do a better job of leaving, the East Coast or the West Coast and really trying to get a feel for who are the people that we may not, necessarily interact with on a day-to-day basis. And, the things that are most important to them. And at the end of the day, the issues that will drive them to choose a certain person at the ballot box. I do, feel confident saying that I think I've seen a ton more coverage in that area in the 2020 election.
Yeah, I think up until the pandemic, we were doing a much better job. We were talking to voters in swing states a lot. I mean, I have done this over and over and over again, and not just certain swing state voters, but different types of voters within those swing states. We have spoken to Trump voters, people who have not been swayed, or pivot counties. We've really segmented down trying to get to the voters. I think since the pandemic, obviously, that has been much more challenging. I've been driving to Nevada and Arizona to do some of these political stories, but it is very difficult, trying to get everywhere. Our Chicago bureau's been doing much more, trying to get voices. So, but the reality is that in a socially distant world, it is going to be much more challenging just because of what we're dealing with.
I know, MJ, I think you have, we're all busy people. MJ's probably got to go. So MJ, do you have any final thoughts before I wrap up with Kyung here?
No, I just, I think being able to share this spot with you, Natasha, and Kyung, it's just really nice to know that there are, other AAPI journalists out there who, share the same goals, have similar experiences. And I just think this gathering is so amazing. Just as a reminder of how many of us are out there, trying to do a good job. And yeah, it's just been really nice to talk to you guys today. And I really want to thank everybody for tuning in.
Yeah, what I would add to that is it makes a big difference if you have somebody who is like you, who can sort of truth talk to you, like MJ does to me. We can say whatever we need to each other. We can tell each other the truth. We can, prop each other up, or we can help guide. She has been my touchstone throughout this year. So what I would encourage you is to get you an MJ, get you a Natasha, and work hard at, finding those people who are like you, who have similar challenges, but will also speak to you in a truthful manner.
Kyung really is like my Korean therapist.
It's so important to have really great colleagues that you trust. And I think that's the one thing that I have experienced with CNN and the teams I work with is that gathering of such immense quantities of information. You really got to have your teammates be strong people who really are by your side for personal and professional reasons. So, MJ, thank you so much. For those of you who can stick around a little bit longer, I do want to ask Kyung one more question. But MJ, thank you so much for being with us.
Guys.
bit. And Kyung, I think a good question for us to kind of tie things up with a bow here is one question that somebody asked about young girls who come up to you for advice. And if so, what advice do you give them?
Young girls meaning like children or characterize.
I think either when you're out on the campaign trail and they see you as a journalist, a woman of color, doing what you do, what do you say to them?
I've had a ton of, especially very uniquely, a lot of mixed race girls specifically come up to me, specifically talk to me on the campaign trail. And it's experience that I've had a lot of, where parents, bring their little girls up. Just, hey, can I hold your mic for a second? Can I see what you see? Or um, it's giving them an example of what it looks like to be a part of something that's that's public facing. I think it is important. And so when I think about all those, especially at campaign rallies, when I saw a lot of little girls of color, it's to tell them that they are seen. Like that is, I think, the most important thing. um, I don't know if you guys had this experience when you watch Crazy Rich Asians. I mean, I wept during that movie. I wept afterwards because that was such a unique experience to me, to see someone who wasn't doing karate, who wasn't somebody's, concubine, who wasn't wearing, some historical piece of Asian dress, who just was this flawed, interesting, woman who has a degree and is just trying to find love. Something very simple, a rom com. And it was so important to me because it was an example, right? It's this notion of not just representation. Okay, we can talk about representation all day long, but it's about actually being seen in a way that other people just take for granted. And so when I've seen these little girls, I tell them that they are seen. Here's an example. Maybe I'm your example, maybe I'm not, but go out and do it. You can do whatever you want. Don't limit yourself because you think that you can't or there isn't a strong enough example. There are now examples, and there are going to continue to be more examples. And that, I think, is something that I try to impart when I see girls or younger women.
I fully, wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said, and I think that for me, one of the things I, in retrospect, dealt with in climbing up this career chain, going through local news, I thought that I had to play to the rules of a society, of an industry where the standard was male and not a person of color. And so I tried to do things that I felt would be acceptable to that paradigm, right? And I think the more that I see, especially in recent years, especially in 2020, is that we can succeed by being ourselves. And we may even succeed because we are being ourselves, right? We want that now. The world is expecting us to demonstrate our unique perspectives and what we bring to the table, not how well we're able to be like the traditional models we've seen before. Our success is because we are diverse as a team. I don't know if any of you have seen recently CNN's clip showing some of us people of color both behind the scenes and in front of the camera. And one of the lines in that clip is, in order to cover the world, we have to reflect the world. And 100%, if we are not involving people of different thought perspective and experience perspectives, then we're missing stories, then we're missing angles. So I don't know. I feel like for the little girls growing up now, and even not so little girls, people maybe who are college students, who are young women, this is the best time to now. You should feel empowered to be yourself and to succeed at that. So that's my TED talk. Kyung, any final thoughts before we say goodbye to people?
And to make a mistake, right? I mean, I think that so many of us are raised, or either you're going to be perfect or you're going to be the Asian F, right? So, you should make mistakes. You should be flawed. You should be multidimensional. Um, and so I think it's very uncomfortable if you're gonna. I would encourage you to watch On the Trail, because you're going to see a lot of women who are not white, be very human, and I hope that you take that as encouragement. That I think the reason why all of us did it is because we want to show that women and women of color are doing this, but we're not perfect, and we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to have messy personal lives, and that's part of the full picture of America. So I really do encourage you to take a look if you can.
I second that. This was a really fun film to watch, and I say fun because it was an emotional ride. I mean, just knowing what the rigors of the campaign trail are, and then knowing the pandemic that follows. Woof. So that you can see all on the HBO Max. I'm so excited that it's out there. And there's still the year is far from over, folks. So there will be much more to follow by watching the rest of my colleagues cover this campaign through November, cover the campaigns. In fact, I think that's probably why MJ had to dash, because she's got some important things to figure out. Not to give anything away. But and Kyung, I think you ended the film by saying that you feel like the attention, the power, the passion this time is not going to turn away. And I certainly hope, as we close this, that all of you who have joined us, take what you're gathering from AAJA Fest this week, from our fantastic panelists, Kyung and MJ, and don't turn away from this empowerment that you're feeling all week, even if we are behind screens. And with that, I want to say thank you so much to Kyung for being one of my mentors and heroes. I want to be Kyung when I grow up. Yeah. And Kyung, I hope we have an eating contest matchup at some point, because you and I have both won one. Yeah. So, okay, thank you all so much. And if you have other questions, of course, find us on social media, send us an email, and enjoy the rest of AAJA Fest. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.